Join me as we cook pinto beans for supper. We can some pinto beans in our pressure canner, and I share a couple other recipes all involving these pinto beans. We are going to pressure can some beans. So last night I put about double this amount of beans on. I picked through them, all the what's the door? Okay, so last night I rinsed a bunch of pinto beans, picked through them, pulled out any that I didn't like the looks of. I pulled out a rock. You have to watch because pinto beans are an agricultural product. There's sometimes rocks make it through the machines and things like that. So I picked through them, I rinsed them off, and I soaked them. And this is about half of them because I put about half in my Instapot to cook on the slow cooker function of my Instapot, and we are going to have pinto beans and cornbread tonight. And then I made enough that I should be able to take some of those leftover beans and make beef and bean burritos for my freezer tomorrow. So hopefully we'll get to that as well. But I'm going to pressure can these beans right here. So these I've let soak a little longer. The ones I put in the Instapot just soaked about 8 hours. These have been soaking for probably close to like 18 hours. I'm not really sure. But anyways, these have been soaking for a while. I am following the process that is on the University of Kentucky's extension website, so you don't have to buy anything. It should be in your canning book and all those things. But what I'm going to get going first is I'm going to can these in pint jars. And so these pint jars have been washed, but I'm just going to put them in my water bath canner back here just to kind of get hot and sterilized. We're not going to water bath can the beans. We are going to pressure can the beans, but I'm just going to get the jars nice and hot and sterilized in this water bath canner while I am cooking the beans. So the beans, I'm going to rinse this water off, put them in a pot of new water. We're going to cook them for 30 minutes. We're going to bring them to a boil and let them boil for 30 minutes. So I'm going to get these pint jars dropped in this pot, and then I'm going to get these put in a pot to cook for 30 minutes. So I have been wanting, so these are rinsed. I'm just going to put them in this pot, and then I'm going to get some water on this pot. This is a 5-quart stock pot, I think is what it says, and it is about to right here with the beans. And we're just going to put some water on it and get it to boiling. So the other day we wanted tacos or something like that, and I was like, but I don't have any beans. And so now I'm forcing myself to get these canned because I've just kind of quit buying them. And I did the same thing when I was ready to start making all of our bread at home. I just eventually had to quit buying it at the store because if I didn't have it, I had to make it. Okay, so I'm going to pour this water on here and all over my floor. It's okay. I needed to mop it anyways. So I'm going to get these to boil, and once they come up to a boil, I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes. So I decided that while I was pressure canning some pinto beans, we would go ahead and have pinto beans and cornbread for supper that night. And I am slow cooking them. I'm just slow cooking them in my Instapot. So I just scooped out a few cupfuls of pinto beans. I was not measuring this, but I just covered the beans then up with water, just used enough water to cover them. And then to the pinto beans, and again, I had soaked these the night before, I'm adding a package of ham pieces or biscuit ham, country ham pieces there. And then I'm going to also add a diced up onion to this pot. And then I'm just going to let this cook slow, about 8 hours on high, and it's just going to cook all day while I do other things, and then we'll enjoy it tonight. So I'm canning the beans to be like just have shelf stable beans, but I also said I put those beans on to cook for pinto beans and cornbread tonight. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to thaw out all of this crappie. This was, let's see, from February. That's when my husband caught it and we vacuum sealed it. So I'm going to get this thawing so we can have crappie with our pinto beans and cornbread tonight. So I have always heard that if the beans float, they're bad. So I generally go through and like scoop up any of the beans that float And I'm starting to get bubbles, so it's harder to see. But I looked it up, and most people said it was a myth. But in general, the ones that are floating are like a dud. Let me show you. So they're just like skin that I missed, or, you know, they're just kind of a dud of a bean. So, I don't know. You can let me know. Do you pick out, have you ever heard that myth before? Is it a myth? Is it true? What is it? Let me know what you think. Okay, and the beans are boiling now, so I am gonna set a timer for 30 minutes. And then we are gonna start cooking cornbread to go with our pinto beans and cornbread for tonight. Now, they're gonna try to take my southern card because I actually make sweet cornbread. Even to have with pinto beans and cornbread, that's the way we like it. And I add flour to my cornbread. So, just heads up, that's how I make it. But I do start with a cast iron skillet. I may be breaking from tradition, but we're not gonna break from that tradition. So I put my butter in the cast iron skillet, and then as the oven is preheating, we'll stick this skillet in there and it will melt our butter for us. So let me grab a knife. We are using, I actually use a recipe, I'll link it down below. I found this recipe several years ago, and it has kind of just been my go-to. Now, my mother-in-law, and I'm pretty sure my grandma did not make their cornbread this way. I don't think either of them use flour. I don't know that they use sugar, and I'm pretty sure they use lard. But this is how we like it. So if it sounds good to you, I will link it down below. It's not quite as sweet as the little blue box cornbread, but it's sweeter than a traditional cornbread. So I'm gonna put this butter in the oven. Okay, now as far as the rest of it, we are going to go in with equal parts, if I can find it, equal parts flour and cornmeal. And then sugar, but I do reduce the sugar on this. I will say the recipe calls for a half a cup of sugar, and I do a third of a cup of sugar. And I think that's about the only modification I make to this. So then we're gonna also add the salt to the cornbread and the baking powder. I've mentioned it before, but I really do like this rum-filled baking powder. It doesn't have aluminum in it, and so that is the baking powder that I use. And so I'm going to add that, and then I'm going to add the milk. I'm a little generous with the milk because I was a little generous with the flour and cornmeal. So you will see as you start to bake and cook things more, you kind of just get a feel for how things are supposed to look. Yes, it's good to follow a recipe, but if it looks a little dry, I'll just add a little more milk, or vice versa. So I'm gonna add the egg, and at this point my kid's piano teacher has come in, and it is a little awkward to film. She's a close family friend, but it still gets a little awkward there. So I'm just gonna mix this cornbread mix up, and then I had the butter in the oven melting in the cast iron skillet. So I'm going to pull that out, and then I'm just going to pour the cornbread mixture straight over into that buttered hot cast iron pan. And so I'm going to scrape that clean. We don't want to leave any of that behind. Does anybody else, when they would watch people cook like on cooking shows, and it would drive them crazy at the amount of stuff that they just left in the bowl? We're going to try to scrape this as clean as we can get it, and then we are going to put it in the oven to bake. So here you can see I'm just kind of lightly smoothing the batter out across the top, and then I'm going to use this giant hot pad basically. My friend that's the piano teacher actually made that for me, and I'm going to stick it in the oven, and then here is what it looked like when it came out of the oven, and it was so delicious. And then here I've got this bag that I just keep some extra rings on hand. If you have not canned before, you do reuse the rings. You don't reuse the lids, but you do reuse the rings. You'll see some lids in there because I do reuse them for things like dry goods, but not for pressure canning. And here was me explaining about the lid of the pressure canner to my daughter.
My sisters to grow up and do my thing. What are you doing?
So, you always want to make sure the vent hole is clear.
Oh.
And so the way you test it is you hold it to the light and make sure that you can see the vent. Okay, now it's time to get my hot jars out of the water, and I'm just using that grabber and then my stainless steel funnel. I canned for quite a while without having the funnel, and now I wonder how in the world I ever did it because it is so handy. And so I'm going to get my beans that have been on the stove boiling for 30 minutes, and I'm going to get them spooned up into my jars. Now, I have never done this before. I have never canned dry beans before. I've canned a lot of green beans throughout the years, but never any dry beans. So I'm just kind of doing just a small batch here to see how this goes. But here we are just filling the jars with the beans and then some of the liquid from cooking the beans. And then I ended up having enough to do 4 of those pint jars with beans. I'm going to poke out any air bubbles, and then I'm going to wipe off the rims of the jars in hopes of getting a good seal on the jars. And then I'm going to put the lids on the jars, and at this point I start to realize that I have not put salt in my beans yet, and I intended to add salt. And so as I'm sticking right there, I realize it. As I'm sticking the rings on, I realize that I have not salted the beans, so I take all that off and then I add the salt to my beans. In this first jar, I actually add double the amount of salt that I was supposed to add to the beans, and I just decided that that jar is just going to be salty and we're just going to go on. And so I correct it on the next 3 and add the correct amount of salt on or into the pint jars of the beans. And so when you are pressure canning, you do want to stick to the recipe so that acidity and all those things are correct, but I don't think a little too much salt in that one jar is going to hurt it. So wipe off the rims again, put the lids back on, and put the rings on what is called finger tight, is kind of how you want to tighten those. And then I'm going to use my jar lifter to lift them into my pressure canner. Now the pressure canner should be on the stove, and it has a little trivet in the bottom. I don't think I got a picture of that little trivet, but it should have a little trivet in the bottom. And I'm just going to do these 4 jars. My canner will hold up to 7 quarts, but you can do just 4 like I'm doing here. And here you can see I'm just consulting the manual again to double check. Even though I have pressure canned a lot, I'm double checking to make sure it is 3 quarts of water that is supposed to go in my pressure canner. And for my particular canner, it may vary depending on your canner. You are supposed to put in my canner 3 quarts of warm water, and so that's what I did. I added the 3 quarts of hot water, and then I'm putting the lid on to my canner, and it's not wanting to lock into place. And then I remember to line up the arrows on the side of the canner, and when I do that, it's going to make my gauge be at the back. So I actually flip the whole canner around, just spin it around, so that when I line up those arrows and then lock my canner lid into place, the gauge is at the front. So while I'm canning, I can see what I'm doing. And then here you will see it starts to steam out the little vent hole. I don't know that you can see the steam on the camera, maybe a little there at the top, but it's starting to steam. And so I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes and let the steam vent out that hole for 10 minutes. And then once that is done, I'm going to place this jiggler on top, and then the pressure will start to move from 0 to, the goal here is 11, but mine went all the way up to almost 15. Okay, so we are too high, but we are not going to freak out. We're just going to turn the temperature down and it'll come down. So we are going to go ahead and start our time. So we need 75 minutes. We only need 11 pounds of pressure, but we're going to go ahead and set our timer for 75 minutes, and we're going to try to get this down closer to 11. So I showed you earlier we were having pinto beans, and we had made the cornbread already. So to go with that, we used to really like to have salmon patties with just canned salmon. But we have crappie meat in our freezer. We usually keep some crappie meat in our freezer. So a few months ago, I started testing using crappie meat to make crappie cakes or crappie patties instead of buying that tinned salmon to make salmon patties. And so that's what I'm doing here. I have thawed out the crappie from our freezer. I'm adding some salt and pepper, and then I'm going to add an egg, and then I'm going to mix it up by hand, and we are going to have crappie cakes to go with our pinto beans and cornbread tonight. We actually some of my kids like to mix it all together. Some keep different things separate on their plate and whatever. But you're going to mix this like you would do a meatloaf. It is definitely not the most aesthetically pleasing thing, but it is really delicious, and the meat isn't costing us anything, so we are enjoying having that. So this is what it looks like kind of when it's all mixed together. And then I'm going to put some coconut oil in the bottom of a cast iron skillet, and we're going to fry these up. And so I just get a chunk of the meat mixture, I don't know, somewhere between maybe a golf ball size and a tennis ball size amount of meat, flatten it out, and then put it in the skillet to cook. And then I'm just going to repeat that until I have used up all of the meat. And then we're going to cook the meat on both sides until it is cooked all the way through. And with all this canning going on and the cooking the beans for tonight, I didn't get the final clip of the meal that we enjoyed for supper that night filmed, but here you can see kind of what the crappie cakes look like as they are finished. You saw the cornbread earlier that we ate with it, and then I'm going to show you in just a second what those pinto beans looked like that we put in the Instapot after they had cooked on high for at least 8 hours, but I think it ended up being a little more like 10 hours. Yeah, so an hour and a half over our 8 hours that those had cooked, and then we served them up. So let me know if you enjoy eating anything particular with your pinto beans and cornbread. And then let's get back and check on our pressure canned beans. Okay, so we are down to 0 pressure. The plug at the back has released itself, so I'm going to go ahead and pop the regulator off, and we're going to open this up. It doesn't look like it broke, but we'll see. I was worried that one of them had broke. This is about to get washed, but it's just the settings. So, 1, 2, insert the lifter and get this out. Okay, so I'm going to jar up the beans that are left over. These are the ones that we canned, but I'm going to jar up what is left over from eating tonight to turn into beef and bean burritos that I'm aiming to freeze. So these aren't getting canned, pressure canned or anything. I'm just going to stick them in the fridge to use for the beans. And this was really why I made pinto beans, was to make the burritos, but I've got a couple of kiddos that really like pinto beans and cornbread, and it's really getting too warm now to really have that as a meal. We think of that as a summer meal at least, or as a winter meal. We don't really eat pinto beans and cornbread in the summer. So that'll probably be the last time we'll have it until it cools down again. But I wanted to have some beans made up for beef and bean burritos that we're going to eat tomorrow night. Or that is the plan at least. And I did hear at least one of those seal, hopefully more than one of them seals, but we won't touch them or do anything with the ones that were pressure canned until morning, and in the morning we will check on them. So there's that. And then I keep old lids to reuse just for this purpose. I don't can with the old lids, but I keep them down here to use for stuff that I'm sticking in the fridge. So we will turn these into some beef and bean burritos tomorrow, or that is the plan at least, and then we will leave these sitting for the night and check and make sure how they seal in the morning. So thanks for coming along with us. So here is a clip of me checking those beans the next morning, and unfortunately only half of the jars successfully sealed. This has happened to me a few times in the past, but usually I have a much higher success rate of jars sealing. I'm not really sure if it was the lids, if it was because I had to open them back up and then resalt them and I didn't get them wiped down good, or exactly what happened, but regardless, I stuck the 2 jars that did not seal in the fridge, and then the other 2 I put on the shelf that are now shelf stable. And here I am. This was actually a few days before, but this is a great recipe to use up some of those beans, and so I thought I would share it with you here. I was making some homemade tortillas there, and then now I'm gonna make some filling for some beef and bean burritos. These were such a hit at our house. I made a big batch of beef and bean burritos. Here I am just opening the beef and getting it in the cast iron skillet to cook. I just seasoned it and cooked it down, and then I'm going to take you along as we make these, but these froze so wonderfully. So this beef is from a cow that we have on the farm here where we live. My in-laws have a beef operation on the farm that we live on, and so that's why the meat looks a little different if you are used to buying your beef at the store. This is beef from the farm, and I'm putting it in this skillet to cook. Now our rolls are actually about 1.5 pound rolls, but I turned this meat into beef and bean burritos and then also tacos this particular day for some company we had. And now here I'm straining off the grease, and I posted a short about this a while back, and people were very alarmed that I was throwing tallow away. I have some in the fridge that I have kept, but this one already had some onion in it, and I just did not need to keep onion beef tallow. But I'm going to season it with some chili powder and some cumin and some paprika and some salt and pepper, and then I decided to actually just throw a little bit of salsa in there with the meat also. So once I get all the seasonings there, I'm gonna just cook that meat just a little bit longer in this skillet, stir it all up, let those flavors kind of meld into it. I'm gonna move that beef tallow out of your way so you're not having to sit there and look at that. I'm going to get all of this mixed up. And then I'm going to put just a little bit of water in there, just enough to kind of help all those seasonings mix in to the beef. You could use a taco seasoning packet if you wanted to here. And then I have cooked my tortillas, and now I am going to fill them with just a spoonful of beef. And then I'm going to get a spoonful of pinto beans and pile that up, and then I'm going to add a little bit of fresh shredded cheese to it as well. And no laughing at my burrito rolling skills here. They are by no means expert or even proficient. They are very novice, but they work. So I'm going to fill this 9x13 dish with these beef, bean, and cheese burritos. Okay, so I got 12 of those burritos made, and I'm going to stick it in the freezer in this 9x13, and then once it is kind of flash frozen, so probably sometime tomorrow because it's like 8:30, I don't know, I'll pull these out and I'll maybe individually or two wrap these up so that we can reheat these easier, but I'm going to just stick this in the freezer like it is. Okay, so I just pulled these out of the freezer, and so we're going to wrap them. We're going to wrap them and stick them in the freezer bag, but I'm going to individually wrap them just so they're easier to pull out. So here I just tore out 6 sheets of this paper, and then I'm going to cut them in half so that I'm just getting to wrap these really lightly. And so I'm going to line these up, and I'm going to pry them out of my 9x13 dish. They actually pop out pretty easy. They're completely solid frozen, and they didn't stick bad at all. And then I'm just going to roll those and then tuck in the edges and wrap and roll, and then I'm going to put them in a freezer bag so that we can just pull out 1 or 2 or however many we want, and then stick them in the air fryer to reheat them. So I'm just going to get this bag froze, and then I'm going to get it labeled with what it is and when I made it, because we all know that once you stick things in the freezer that it is easy to lose track of them and what they are. So thanks for joining me as I shared a little bit about pinto beans, pressure canning them, cooking them for supper, and even turning them into these beef and bean burritos. Thanks for joining me, guys.